So I want AmeriFlux, but also FLUXNet and ISCN, since those are also networks that have Arctic data in different flavors. So I want to give you a feel for what the options are there. So I added the key members of our team, and Gilberto Pastorello is on the call and actually can answer very specific data questions if you have them. Margaret Torn is the PI for the AmeriFlux work, and Sebastian Birod leads our work on the data QA/QC, and I'll mention that briefly as well. Let's see, I got to get my focus back. Okay, so a little bit of background on AmeriFlux and by definition FLUXNet as well. It's a network of carbon flux measurement sites where there's a tower, typically above, measuring above the of other measurements. And so what they is a set of half-hourly measurements. They start from typically 10 hertz. So most of the stuff is measured at 10 hertz. You end up with CO2, but also a lot of measurements of methane and other fluxes, the meteorological data, and then a lot of the more manual measurements. And we've worked very hard to have a lot of standardization of the data, since there are all these carbon flux towers. We've now standardized on a reporting method that they all now use, variable names, units, and we're just rolling out brand new improved data QA/QC, but we've always done data QA/QC before we serve up the data. So FLUXNet then is the international collaboration that brings together all the regional networks and independent sites from across the globe, and then creates a data set that does additional QA/QC, also does gap filling and partitioning of the carbon flux data, and a couple other things that also uses ERA downscaling from the European team to actually do gap filling of the MET data as well. So it's a very nice data set. So, but just to kind of emphasize, I mean, the sites really span all the way from the Arctic to the tropics and beyond. So they're very broad in terms of where these sites are located. So the FLUXNet 2015 set, which is the latest FLUXNet set, just came out, obviously, and we just finished it last year. That contains data through 2014. As I mentioned, it's very standardized. So there's an advantage of using that in that we've done a lot of additional standardization and additional calculations, which are not yet in the AmeriFlux set. Within the next year, they will be, but they are not yet, because we're building new processing code to actually enable that. So if you just take a very strict definition of the Arctic, that gives you a feel for the number of sites in FLUXNet that are in the Arctic. That gives you a little bit of feel for sort of the spread across the various data sets that we've had in FLUXNet. Latui was the much earlier 2007 data set, but roughly it ends up about 14 Arctic sites in FLUXNet. We actually have a lot of downloads that happen of these sets. This actually is numbers from like 6 months ago, but they are extensively used. I mean, these 82,000 downloads on the FLUXNet 2015 set have been within a year. So it is actually getting broad usage. And okay, so let's dig in a little bit more. So looking at the AmeriFlux sites in the Arctic, it depends on really how you want to define the AmeriFlux, the Arctic, but using one definition, you can see that there's a pretty, there's about 13 sites and fairly good amount of data available from these sites. And in fact, the data that we have in our database is not all the data available. So if you look actually at what they've reported, they actually have taken data beyond the time periods that we have in the database, and I can explain why that would be. But I will say that one of the key points I want to make is that one of the things that delays contribution of the contributors of the data to us is fear of people not obeying the data usage requirements in terms of citations and things. And so if you work with us to actually obtain the data and give your investigators clear information about the usage of the data, then it would be very helpful to us, because it will increase the number of data sets that are in our data system. Whenever we've done a campaign with a large user group, it has dramatically improved the availability of data within the database. And so the benefit to you is you get that full QA/QC, you get, you know, within a year you'll get that processing as well. And I will say that we're a little bit behind on processing. We're right in the midst of trying to catch up. And so some of the Arctic data is just sitting, waiting for us to get to it. We've just implemented automation on the QA/QC. And so we will be in the next several months processing those data sets. So what you see as availability today is not all the availability we'll have in a couple months. I also wanted to mention the International Soil Carbon Network. We do have an Arctic data set there. I'm not sure whether this is redundant with the data set we just heard about, whether they've taken all of this carbon data in as well. But the International Soil Carbon Network, we actually started with working in the Arctic. And so 12 of the people that were taking soil cores and doing carbon measurements brought together their data, and actually, and this has then been unified, and things like bulk density have been calculated. There's a fair amount of unification and quality work that we did on that data set. So that's available at the International Soil Carbon Network, which we also host. So one of the advantages of the fact that we host all three of these data sets is that it's one user ID, gets you access to all three. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that all of the data sets I mentioned are free and fair use, but the key aspect of that you want to, that I mentioned, I want your help with on, is really that there are a few conditions in each of these free and fair use rules. And so they have to do with what, you know, citations, notification of the data contributor, and they're not particularly difficult at all, and we're building tools to help people to do them. But they really make the difference between having that data available in a common database or having to go ferret it out of each individual contributor. So this is the information on the websites and support mailing lists for the three sites. What I thought I'd do just for a few minutes is actually take you on a short tour of the AmeriFlux site, so that we could, I can just give you a feel for how to go look for data, because you asked about how do I access the data. I figured the AmeriFlux site was a good place to do that with. So if you'll bear with me for a second, let me reshare with my web browser. This then is ameriflux.lbl.gov. If you look at the, you know, the links here, actually have, you have a site search. So actually, I think I already brought that up. Yeah, so this site search, all I did is go through and just put in the keyword just to search period. That brings a lot of this sites that the Arctic came up from the descriptions primarily, but then that then brings you up an ability to link directly to those individual sites' information. Unlike poor Matt, we have the luxury of that we've actually been able to unify our data. So you do have a nice clean way of being able to look at things. You can download that individual site right there. And you can even see things like, you know, who all's downloading it and what are they using it for. You can get access to their DOI, which covers their site, publications about that data, and then on data download, oops, that was the data download log. So when you are ready to download data, it's a fairly straightforward interface. You just go through and you pick the sites that you want. So let's pick something. I was going to pick an Arctic one. So you just pick each of the ones that you want to download. And getting an account is very straightforward. It's immediately defined. So a key thing here is there's also this BATM data. So I mentioned that there's a great deal of other non-half-hourly data that is collected at these sites. If you want access to all of that, that's all here in this BATM data. And then all you have to do is provide something about your intended use in a description, acknowledge that you've read the policy, and then you're downloading files. The download's very straightforward. It just provides you a set of links, you download the links. So that was pretty much all I had. I'm happy to open up for questions because I think I was the last speaker. So I'm going to go ahead and
all right, that was really nice. Thank you. So why don't we open it up for questions? I'll let other people start first. Other questions out there?
Deb, this is Renee. Can you hear me? I'm with the National Weather Service, Alaska Region Headquarters here in Anchorage. What caught my eye was you made of the meteorological observations that you're making at some of the sites, and I was just wondering, are the data being made available in real time via the global telecommunications system? I know you mentioned that some of the data is going through the data control, but I was wondering if the MET data in particular were being made in real time. Thanks.
So today, any real-time access to data is all provided by individual sites. Right now, today, we take in, typically the most frequent we get is quarterly data, and we don't yet publish at the quarterly rate, but we will be once we get the QA/QC pipeline finished and up and running. But and our longer term plan is to move to real-time displays, but that's we're still really getting all of the data mechanics in place for the more sophisticated features that we want to provide.
Awesome. When you're ready to take that step, let me know. I can certainly hook you up with our data management group back in Silver Spring associated with the gateway, and they can help your IT folks get that process in place. Thanks.